The champagne at the welcome home party was vintage. The smiles were practiced, and the Manhattan skyline glittered through the penthouse glass just as Julian remembered. But the illusion of his perfect marriage shattered in the reflection of the window pane. While his wife fixed his tie with a public display of devotion, her other hand rested intimately on his business partner's lower back. He had woken up from a 6-month coma to find his life exactly where he left it, yet entirely stolen. If the quiet unraveling of a perfect lie intrigues you as much as the truth, stay with me. The real trial hasn't even begun. The silence in the penthouse was expensive. It was the kind of quiet that cost $20,000 a month in maintenance fees. A vacuum-sealed hush that kept the chaotic grit of New York City 40 floors below. Julian Thorne stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, his weight leaning heavily on the carbon fiber cane his wife, Elena, had picked out. It was sleek, black, and matte, designed to look like a fashion accessory rather than a medical necessity. Just like everything else Elena touched, it was curated to hide the ugly truth. "You should be sitting, Julian." Elena's voice floated from the hallway. "Dr. Eris said endurance takes time. Don't push it." Julian didn't turn. He watched his own reflection in the darkening glass. The man staring back was thinner than the one who had collapsed in this very room 8 months ago. The tailored suit hung slightly loose at the shoulders, a reminder of the muscle mass the coma had eaten away. "I'm fine," he said. His voice was gravelly, unused. Elena entered the room. She was breathtaking, a vision in emerald silk that clung to her silhouette. She smelled of santal and cold air. She walked to the wet bar, the click of her heels on the marble floor sounding like a ticking clock. "Marcus is coming up," she said, pouring a sparkling water. "He's been so worried. He practically ran the firm single-handedly while you were away." Away. Julian tasted the word. It was a sterile euphemism for the black void he had floated in while machines pumped air into his lungs. "It's nice of him to stop by." "He's family, Julian." She brought the glass to him. Her fingers brushed his, cool and dry. There was no tremor in her hand, no surge of warmth. It was a transactional touch. "We survived because of him." We. The doorbell chimed, a soft, melodic tone. Julian watched Elena's posture shift. Her spine straightened, her chin lifted, and a subtle flush rose to her neck. It was a physiological reaction he used to think was reserved for him. Marcus walked in, bringing the energy of the city with him. He was loud, expansive, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars. He bypassed the handshake and went for a careful embrace, treating Julian like a piece of porcelain that might shatter. "The king returns," Marcus boomed, pulling back to inspect Julian. "God, you look good. A little thin, but distinguished. Doesn't he look distinguished, Elle?" "He looks like a miracle," Elena said softly. Julian watched them. He saw the way Marcus's eyes didn't stay on Julian's face, but flickered briefly to Elena. He saw the way Elena stood just inside Marcus's personal space, not touching, but magnetically aligned, their bodies angling toward each other unconsciously. "I have a lot to catch up on," Julian said, limping slightly as he moved toward the sofa. "The Hudson Yards project. Did we secure the zoning?" Marcus laughed, a sound that was a little too sharp. "Julian, please. You've been back for 4 hours. The zoning is handled. Everything is handled. Your job right now is to rest. Elena and I have done the heavy lifting." "Right," Julian said, sinking into the leather armchair. "The heavy lifting." Elena moved to the coffee table to set down a coaster for Marcus. As she leaned forward, the neckline of her dress shifted. Julian saw it then, a faint, fading bruise on her collarbone. Small, circular, not an accident. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the heavy gold ring on Marcus's pinky finger. The room suddenly felt very cold. Julian gripped the handle of his cane until his knuckles turned white. He remembered the darkness of the coma, the feeling of being trapped in his own body. He was awake now, but looking at his wife and his best friend, he realized the nightmare hadn't ended. It had just changed venues. To the comeback, Marcus said, raising his glass. Julian forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. To the comeback. He took a sip. The water tasted like ash. He knew, with the instinct that had made him a master architect, that the structure of his life was already condemned. He just needed to find the load-bearing wall to knock down. The morning light in the penthouse was unforgiving. It exposed the dust motes dancing in the air and the tremor in Julian's left hand as he tried to button his shirt. His fingers, once capable of sketching the intricate load-bearing dynamics of a suspension bridge, now fumbled with a simple piece of plastic. He cursed softly, dropping his hand to his side. "Let me help." Elena appeared in the doorway of the walk-in closet. She was already dressed for the day in a sharp navy blazer, holding an iPad against her chest like a shield. She stepped forward, her perfume, a heavy floral scent he used to love but now found cloying, filling the small space. She buttoned his shirt with efficient, motherly movements. It was emasculating. "You have a meeting with a physical therapist at 10, she said, smoothing his collar, "and then a nap. You need to pace yourself." "I don't need a nap, Elena. I need to see the quarterly reports," Julian said, his voice steady. "I saw a notification on the shared drive this morning, a transfer authorized from the operating account. Who is Vane Holdings, LLC? Elena's hands froze on his shoulders for a fraction of a second. It was a micro-tremor, imperceptible to anyone who hadn't spent 10 years memorizing her body language. She resumed smoothing the fabric, her smile tight and pitying. "Julian, honey," she sighed, her tone dropping into the register one uses for a stubborn child. "We talked about this. There is no Vane Holdings. You're getting confused again. Dr. Eris said memory lapses are normal." "I saw the email, Elena." "You saw a spam folder, or you misread an invoice," she corrected gently, stepping back. "Marcus and I restructured some logistics to keep the firm afloat while you were sleeping. It's all standard. Don't worry your head about numbers right now. Just focus on walking." "Don't worry your head." Julian looked at her. He saw the slight dilation of her pupils, the way she clutched the iPad tighter. She was lying, and she was doing it with the terrifying confidence of someone who believed he was too broken to catch her. A flash of anger surged in his chest, hot and sharp. He wanted to grab the iPad, demand the password, and tear through the digital veneer she had constructed. He wanted to scream that his mind was the one thing the coma hadn't touched. But he looked at his cane leaning against the wall. He looked at the pity in her eyes. If he fought her now, she would call the doctor. She would sedate him. She would lock him out completely under the guise of medical necessity. Julian let his shoulders slump. He allowed his face to go slack, erasing the intelligence from his eyes. He reached up and rubbed his temple, feigning a grimace of pain. Maybe you're right," he stammered, purposely slurring the words slightly. "I feel it's a bit foggy today. I thought I saw. Never mind." The tension instantly drained from Elena's frame. She exhaled, a sound of relief masked as sympathy. "It's okay," she soothed, patting his cheek. "Go to therapy. I'll handle the firm. I'll handle everything." She turned and walked out, checking her iPad as she went. Julian watched her go. He waited until he heard the front door click shut. Then he straightened his spine. The tremor in his hand was still there, but the fog in his mind was gone. He walked over to the mirror. The man staring back looked weak, confused, and harmless. It was the perfect disguise. "Handle everything," he whispered to the empty room. He picked up his cane, not to lean on it, but to test its weight. It was heavy, solid. It would do. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the lingering scent of Elena's perfume, notes of crushed rose and something metallic, like cold cash. She had left 20 minutes ago for the Guggenheim Gala, a vision in silver silk, leaving Julian with a pitying kiss on the forehead and the instruction to get plenty of rest. As soon as the private elevator hummed its descent, Julian dropped the cane. He didn't limp as he walked to his study. The pain was still there, a dull throb in his hip, but adrenaline was a powerful anesthetic. He closed the heavy oak doors of the office, engaging the mechanical lock. It was the only room in the penthouse that didn't have smart home integration, a paranoia of his that Elena used to mock, but which now served as his only sanctuary. He sat in his leather chair, the leather groaning softly under his weight. He woke his desktop computer. The screen flared to life, casting a harsh blue light on his sharp, focused features. He typed in his primary password, a string of characters based on the coordinates of his first major building. Access denied. He tried his secondary password, the one he used for the firm's encrypted architectural archives. Account suspended. Please contact administrator. Julian stared at the screen. The administrator was Marcus. They hadn't just taken his chair at the board table, they had erased his digital footprint. To the server, Julian Thorne didn't exist. He was a ghost in the machine of his own creation. Predictable, Julian muttered. Marcus was a brilliant salesman, but he was a terrible architect. He understood facades, not foundations. When Julian had built the firm's server infrastructure 5 years ago, he had embedded a hard-coded backdoor, a skeleton key account designed for catastrophic system recovery. It was buried under layers of legacy code that no modern IT audit would bother to check. Julian's fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. He didn't use the mouse. He pulled up the command terminal, typing in a string of syntax that looked like gibberish. Sudo user, architect_01, pass, Vitruvius. The screen blinked black, then green. Access granted. He was in. He didn't go to the emails. Emails could be deleted. Tone could be misinterpreted. He went straight to the ledger. He pulled up the property transfer logs and filtered by date range, starting from the day of his hemorrhage. The list populated instantly. It was a hemorrhage of a different kind. 2 weeks after he fell into the coma, a transfer of deed for the Hamptons estate, transferred to Vane Holdings LLC. 1 month later, the liquidation of his vintage car collection, sold to a private buyer in Dubai, proceeds deposited into an account in the Cayman Islands. 3 months later, a restructuring of the firm's voting shares. Julian's controlling interest had been diluted by the issuance of new stock, gifted to Marcus for emergency management services. Julian scrolled, his eyes reflecting the cascading data. It wasn't just theft, it was an autopsy. They had been carving him up while his heart was still beating. He stopped at a file dated just 3 days ago. It was a draft document, unsigned but prepared. Petition for permanent conservatorship. Petitioner, Elena Thorne. He felt a cold sweat prickle the back of his neck. They weren't just planning to take his money, they were planning to take his agency. They wanted to legally declare him mentally unfit, turning him into a permanent ward of the state and of his wife. Julian reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thumb drive. He copied the ledger, the deed transfers, and the draft petition. The progress bar crawled slowly. 10%, 40%, 80%. The sound of the elevator chiming in the foyer made his heart hammer against his ribs. Elena was back early. He yanked the drive out the second it hit 100%. He killed the terminal window, wiped the command history, and shut down the computer. By the time the study door handle turned, Julian was sitting in the armchair by the window, the room dark, his head lolling to the side, the cane resting against his leg. "Julian?" Elena's voice was sharp. "Why is the door locked?" He stirred, feigning a groggy awakening. He blinked, looking at her silhouette in the doorway. I must have bumped it," he mumbled, his voice thick with fake sleep. "Is the party over?" Elena stared at him. The hallway light backlit her frame, casting a long shadow that stretched across the floor, reaching almost to his feet. She scanned the room, her eyes lingering on the dark computer screen for a heartbeat too long. "Yes," she said slowly, "it's over." Julian closed his eyes again. He had the drive in his pocket. It felt hot against his skin, burning like a brand. "Good night, Elena," he whispered. "Good night, Julian." She closed the door. He listened to her footsteps retreat. He was safe for tonight. But war had just been declared. The rain in New York didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Julian watched the wipers slash across the windshield of the town car. In the front seat, the driver, a new hire named Greg, whom Marcus had insisted upon, watched Julian through the rearview mirror with the attentiveness of a prison guard. "Dr. Eris's clinic is on 57th, sir," Greg said, his eyes meeting Julian's in the glass. "You're certain you want to be dropped at the pharmacy first?" "I need my prescription, Greg," Julian said, infusing his voice with a tremor of irritability. "The pain is significant today. Just wait around the corner. I don't want you hovering." Greg hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, Mr. Thorne." The moment the car idled at the curb of the Duane Reade, Julian opened the door. He leaned heavily on his cane, shuffling inside with the agonizing slowness of a broken man. But the second the automatic doors slid shut behind him, the performance dropped. He didn't go to the pharmacy counter. He moved briskly through the aisles, exited through the service door into the alley, and hailed a yellow cab that was idling by a dumpster. "Hell's Kitchen, 10th Avenue and 45th, Julian ordered, sliding into the cracked vinyl seat. 20 minutes later, he was sitting in a booth at the Metro Diner. The vinyl was taped with silver duct tape, and the air smelled of bacon grease and stale coffee. It was the last place anyone would look for the city's most celebrated architect. Across from him sat Silas Vance. Vance was a divorce attorney who looked more like a weary boxer than a legal scholar. He had a scar through his left eyebrow and a reputation for destroying prenuptial agreements like they were tissue paper. Next to him was Sarah Lynn, a forensic accountant so slight she looked like a gust of wind could blow her away, but whose eyes were sharp as scalpels. Julian slid the thumb drive across the Formica table. "Tell me I'm paranoid," Julian said quietly. Sarah plugged the drive into her laptop. For 10 minutes, the only sound was the clicking of her keys and the clatter of silverware from the kitchen. Vance didn't speak. He just drank black coffee from a styrofoam cup, watching Julian. Finally, Sarah stopped typing. She didn't look at the screen. She looked at Julian with an expression of profound professional horror. "You're not paranoid, Mr. Thorne," she said. "You're under siege." She turned the laptop around. "They've been siphoning liquidity for 6 months. But it's not just theft. See this structure. They've leveraged the firm's debt against your personal assets. If the firm goes under, which Marcus seems to be ensuring it will, you lose everything. The penthouse, the portfolio, the patents." "And the conservatorship?" Julian asked, his voice low. Vance finally spoke. His voice was like grinding stones. "It's a masterpiece, honestly. They have affidavits from 3 doctors, 2 of whom are on your firm's payroll, stating you have significant cognitive decline. Post-traumatic dementia. If Elena files this, she gets control of your medical decisions, your finances, and your voting rights. You become a child in the eyes of the law." Julian felt a cold hollowness in his stomach. "So she doesn't want a divorce?" "No," Vance said. "Divorce is messy. Divorce means splitting assets. She wants to keep you as a pet, a confused, invalid husband she can parade around at galas to garner sympathy while she spends your money with her boyfriend." Julian looked out the window. The rain was hammering against the glass. He thought of Elena's cool hand on his forehead, her soft voice telling him to rest. It wasn't care, it was containment. "What do we do?" Julian asked. Vance leaned forward. "If we file now, she counters with the medical records. It becomes a he said, she said, and right now, you look like the brain-damaged victim. We need to let her trap herself." "How?" "Let her file the petition," Vance said, a cruel smile touching his lips. "Let her stand in front of a judge and swear under oath that you are incompetent. Let her submit the fraudulent financials, and then we walk in." "You want me to wait?" "I want you to be the perfect victim," Vance said. "Sign the papers she puts in front of you, but sign them with your left hand if you're right-handed, or make a mark that looks shaky. Let them think you're fading. The more confident they get, the sloppy they'll become." "We don't just want to win, Julian. We want to dismantle them." Julian looked at his hands. He hated the idea of playing the fool for another day, let alone another month. But he looked at the data on the screen, the architecture of their betrayal. "I have a court date in mind," Vance added, "but until then, you are a ghost. You see nothing, you know nothing." Julian picked up his cane. "I can do that." He paid in cash, leaving a heavy tip. He exited the diner and hailed a cab back to the pharmacy. When he climbed back into the town car 40 minutes later, Greg was still waiting, looking at his phone. "Everything all right, sir?" the driver asked, eyeing the small pharmacy bag Julian had purchased just for the prop. Julian slumped against the leather seat, letting his eyes droop. "I'm tired, Greg," Julian whispered, his voice trembling perfectly. "I just want to go home." As the car pulled away into the rain, Julian closed his eyes. He wasn't tired, he was wide awake. Dinner was a quiet affair, served by the housekeeper who left as soon as the plates touched the table. The meal was sea bass, delicate and light, the kind of food you feed an invalid. Julian pushed a piece of fish around his porcelain plate, listening to the hum of the wine fridge and the distant wail of a siren on First Avenue. Elena sat across from him, scrolling through her phone. The blue light illuminated her face, casting hollows under her cheekbones. She looked tired, or perhaps just bored. "I remembered something today," Julian said softly. Elena didn't look up immediately. "Oh, what did you remember? Another headache?" "No," Julian said. He dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. "Numbers. A sequence. It's been bothering me all afternoon." Elena finally lowered her phone. She took a sip of her Pinot Grigio, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What kind of numbers?" Julian rubbed his forehead, feigning the strain of a firing synapse. "I think, before the accident, I opened a liquidity account, a contingency fund, in Zurich. I didn't put it on the books because of the tax bracket." He watched her throat as she swallowed. The wine glass paused halfway to the table. Greed was a subtle emotion. It didn't scream, it focused. Her pupils dilated. "You never mentioned a Zurich account," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "I know. I wanted to surprise you for our anniversary," Julian lied, his voice trembling with fake regret. "I think there's about 3 million in there. The access code. I think I wrote it in the back of my old sketchbook, the black moleskin." 3 million, she repeated. She set the glass down. "And you think the code is in the sketchbook?" "Maybe," Julian sighed, leaning back and closing his eyes. "I'm so tired, Elle. My head is pounding again. I can't check tonight. I wanted you to know, in case anything happens to me." "Don't talk like that," she said. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. Her palm was damp. "Go to bed, Julian. I'll clean up." Julian went to the master bedroom. He didn't sleep. He lay in the dark, listening. 20 minutes later, he heard the faint creak of the floorboards in the study down the hall, the sound of a drawer sliding open, the rustle of paper. She was looking for the sketchbook. She wouldn't find the code because the account didn't exist, but she would find the sketchbook. The real test, however, was not whether she looked, it was who she told. The next morning, Marcus arrived at 9 a.m. sharp. He brought coffee and a sheaf of documents, his energy manic and bright as always. He set his briefcase on the kitchen island, right where Julian was finishing his toast. "Morning, champion," Marcus grinned. "Rough night? You look a little peaked." "Just the usual," Julian said. "What's the paperwork?" "Just some compliance forms, boring stuff," Marcus said, shuffling the papers. Then he paused. He pulled a single sheet from the bottom of the stack. He tried to make the movement look casual, but Julian saw the tension in his shoulders. "Oh, by the way," Marcus said, not meeting Julian's eyes. "Our auditors picked up a flag on an international compliance check. Something about a Swiss entry? A Zurich contingency? I need you to sign a disclosure form so we can clear it up, avoid any tax penalties." The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. Julian stared at the paper. There was no way an auditor could have flagged an account that didn't exist. There was no way Marcus could know the phrase Zurich contingency unless Elena had called him the moment she left the dinner table. The betrayal wasn't a crack. It was a canyon. Elena hadn't just looked for the money. She had immediately reported the potential asset to Marcus so they could seize it together. Julian looked up at his best friend. He saw the sweat on Marcus's upper lip, the desperation masked as bureaucracy. Zurich, Julian repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Yeah, just a formality, Marcus said, uncapping a pen and pushing it toward Julian. Sign here, and I'll handle the lawyers. Julian took the pen. He looked at the tip, then at Marcus. A slow, vacant smile spread across his face. I don't remember any Zurich account, Julian said, his voice flat. My memory is so bad these days, Marcus. I think I need to rest. He dropped the pen on the counter. It rolled off the edge and hit the floor. But, Marcus started, panic flaring in his eyes. Elena said, the auditors said. Elena said what? Julian asked gently. Marcus froze. He realized he had walked into a trap, but he couldn't see the teeth yet. Nothing, Marcus muttered, bending down to retrieve the pen. Just, never mind. I'll check the records again. You do that, Julian said. He turned and walked toward the window, leaning on his cane. He had them. They were starving wolves, and he had just thrown a rock that smelled like meat. Now he knew exactly how to make them bite. The ballroom at the Pierre was a suffocating box of gold leaf, crystal chandeliers, and hollow applause. The air conditioning was set to a frigid temperature, yet Julian felt sweat trickling down his back inside his tuxedo. He stood center stage, the spotlight blindingly hot against his retinas. Beside him, Marcus held the heavy glass prism of the Architect of the Decade Award, an award that the committee had voted for Julian 2 years ago, but which Marcus was now clutching like a war trophy. Julian is the soul of this firm, Marcus told the microphone, his voice thick with performative emotion. But even as he fights his brave battle for recovery, the vision continues. We carry his torch. The crowd applauded. Hundreds of faces, competitors, clients, critics, looked up at Julian with a mixture of reverence and morbid pity. They weren't cheering for his genius, they were cheering for his survival, like he was a rescued stray dog. Elena stood slightly behind him, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. To the audience, it looked like support. To Julian, it felt like a restraint. She squeezed his trapezius muscle, a subtle signal, smile, don't fall over, don't embarrass us. Julian offered a weak, lopsided smile to the cameras. He played his part, the fragile genius, the broken king. When the lights finally dimmed and the crowd dispersed for cocktails, Julian whispered that he needed water. He extricated himself from the suffocating orbit of well-wishers and limped toward the VIP cloakroom, a secluded alcove near the service exits. He needed a moment to drop the mask. His jaw ached from clenching it. As he rounded the corner, he heard the hushed, urgent voices. They were coming from the small vestibule connecting the ballroom to the loading dock, a space reserved for staff and smoking. He almost dropped the cane on the stairs, Marcus's voice hissed. Did you see that? I thought I was going to have to carry him. Keep your voice down, Elena snapped. Julian froze. He pressed his back against the velvet-covered wall. He was hidden by a large potted palm, invisible in the shadows. I'm tired of babysitting, Elle, Marcus continued, the sound of a lighter flicking audible. And that Zurich thing? My lawyer spent 3 days chasing ghosts. There's no account. The old man is hallucinating. His brain is Swiss cheese. I know, Elena sighed. There was no defense in her tone, only exhaustion. He's deteriorating. Dr. Eris says the paranoia is a stage of the regression. Tonight was necessary, Marcus. The stock stabilized the moment they saw him standing next to you. He's not standing next to me, Marcus sneered. He's a prop, a scarecrow we prop up in the cornfield to keep the investors from flying away. I look at him and I don't even see Julian anymore. I just see dead weight. "It won't be long," Elena said softly. Her voice was terrifyingly gentle. "The hearing is in 2 weeks. Once the conservatorship is granted, we can move him to that facility in Connecticut, the one near the lake. He'll be comfortable there, and we can finally stop pretending." "Connecticut," Marcus chuckled darkly. "Out of sight, out of mind." Julian heard the rustle of fabric, a pause, then the wet, sickening sound of a kiss. Julian stood absolutely still. The cane in his hand felt like a weapon. For months he had told himself that perhaps there was still some love left, that maybe Elena was misguided, that maybe Marcus was just opportunistic. But this was different. This was contempt. They didn't just want his money, they were disgusted by his existence. They were already mourning him while he was still standing in the next room. The sadness that had plagued Julian since the coma evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, crystalline clarity. The dead weight in the hallway straightened his spine. He adjusted his cufflinks. He checked his reflection in the darkened window pane. The eyes staring back weren't confused. They were predatory. He tapped his cane on the floor. Once, twice, loud enough to be heard, but rhythmic enough to sound like an approaching shuffle. "Elena?" he called out, injecting a pathetic wobble into his voice. I think I'm lost." The voices in the vestibule silenced instantly. Elena emerged a second later, smoothing her dress, her face a mask of concern. "I'm here, darling," she cooed, reaching for him. "Did you get confused again?" Julian looked at her. He looked at the woman who planned to discard him in a facility in Connecticut so she could enjoy his life without the burden of his presence. "Yes," Julian said, leaning heavily on her arm. "I got confused, but I think I know where I'm going now." He let her lead him back to the party. He would let them have their champagne. He would let them have their applause. It was the last celebration they would ever have. 3 days later, the ambush arrived, wrapped in high-grade bond paper and false sympathy. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and listless. Julian was sitting in the living room, staring at a blank sketchbook, when the private elevator opened without the usual chime. Elena entered, followed closely by a man Julian recognized, Arthur Sterling. Sterling was the firm's corporate counsel, a man with a smile like a razor blade and a morality to match. They didn't sit down. They stood over him, blocking the light from the window. "Julian," Elena said, her voice dropping to that practiced, soothing register she used for phone calls with investors. "We need to talk about your future." She placed a heavy folder on the coffee table. It was blue. In the legal world, blue meant petitions. Blue meant the state was getting involved. "Arthur has prepared some documents," Elena continued, sitting on the edge of the sofa, keeping a safe distance. "Dr. Eris and I agree that the city, it's too much for you. The stress, the noise, it's impeding your recovery." Julian looked at the folder. He didn't touch it. "What is this?" "It's a solution," Sterling said. His voice was oily. "A petition for conservatorship. It grants Elena full power of attorney over your medical and financial decisions. It also authorizes your transfer to the Oak Haven facility in Connecticut. It's a specialized retreat, very quiet, very private." Julian looked up. Elena's face was perfectly composed, a mask of tragic necessity. She believed her own performance. She believed she was the long-suffering wife making the hard choice, not the adulterer discarding a husband she had already stripped clean. "Connecticut," Julian repeated, letting a tremor of fear enter his voice. "But I live here. This is my house." "It's not a house, Julian. It's a liability," Sterling corrected sharply. "The firm is suffering. Your erratic behavior, the confusion about the Zurich accounts, the memory lapses, it's spooking the board. Elena is trying to save your legacy." Elena reached out and tapped the document. "If you sign the attached consent waiver, we can avoid a hearing. No judges, no reporters. You can go to Oak Haven this weekend. We'll take care of everything." Julian stared at the pen Sterling was holding out. It was a Mont Blanc, expensive, heavy. The trap was elegant. Sign the waiver and he vanished quietly into the sedation of a countryside facility. refuse, and they would drag him to court to prove he was insane. They expected him to fight, to scream, or to weep. They expected the confused invalid to be overwhelmed. Julian reached for the folder. His hand shook visibly. He opened it and scanned the pages. He saw the clauses stripping him of his voting rights. He saw the monthly stipend, $5,000, an insult considering his net worth was in the 8 figures. He saw the medical directive allowing forced medication. It was a death warrant for his identity. He looked at Elena. He saw the tension in her jaw. She wanted this over. She wanted to go meet Marcus and celebrate. Julian closed the folder. He didn't take the pen. "I don't understand it," Julian said softly. "It's standard legal language," Sterling said, impatient now. "Just sign, Julian." "No," Julian said. He looked at the window, at the gray sky. "I don't want to sign. It's too complicated. I think I need someone to explain it to me, a judge." The room went deadly silent. "A judge?" Elena repeated, her voice sharpening. "Julian, a court hearing will be humiliating for you. They'll ask you questions you can't answer. They'll look at your medical records. Do you really want the world to know how broken you are?" "I just want to be sure," Julian said, turning his gaze back to her. He made his eyes wide, watery, innocent. "If the judge says I'm broken, then I'll go. But I can't sign this. I'm afraid I'll do it wrong." Elena exchanged a look with Sterling. Disappointment flashed across her face, followed by a hardened resolve. She stood up. "Fine," she said coldly. The mask slipped just an inch. "If you want a judge to tell you that you're incompetent, Julian, I'll arrange it. But don't say I didn't try to protect you." "I know you're trying, Elle," Julian whispered. "You always try." Sterling snatched the folder back. "We'll file for an emergency hearing next Thursday. Be ready." They left the apartment with the energy of a storm front retreating. Julian waited until the elevator doors sealed shut. He picked up his phone, a burner he had taped under the drawer of the side table. He dialed Silas Vance. "They took the bait," Julian said, his voice steady and cold. "Thursday, 9 a.m., docket 4. "Are you ready?" Vance asked. Julian looked at the space where Elena had been sitting. "I've been ready for 8 months," he said. "Bring everything." He hung up. Outside, the rain began to fall again, washing the city, preparing it for Judgment Day. The courtroom was smaller than Julian expected. It smelled of floor wax and old paper. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed with a low, headache-inducing frequency that usually drove him mad, but today he found it grounding. He sat at the defendant's table next to Silas Vance. Across the aisle, Elena sat with Arthur Sterling. She was wearing black, simple, understated, mourning the living. She dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief as Sterling finished his opening statement. "Your Honor," Sterling said, his voice grave, "we take no pleasure in this. Mr. Thorne is a brilliant man, a visionary. But the medical records are clear. The trauma from the hemorrhage has resulted in severe cognitive regression, paranoia, and hallucinations. Just last week, he believed he had millions hidden in a non-existent Swiss account. He is a danger to his own estate." The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, looked down at Julian. "Mr. Thorne," she said, "do you understand the nature of these proceedings?" Elena leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "Julian, please, just let us help you." Julian looked at the cane resting against his chair. It had been his prop, his shield, and his burden for weeks. He looked at his hands. They were steady. He stood up. He didn't pick up the cane. The silence in the room changed texture. It went from respectful to confused. Julian didn't shuffle. He didn't slump. He buttoned his suit jacket with a sharp, precise movement. He walked to the center of the room, his stride even and commanding. "I understand perfectly, Your Honor," Julian said. His voice was different. The gravelly, hesitant slur was gone. It was the voice that had commanded construction sites and boardroom meetings for a decade, resonant, clear, and terrifyingly calm. Elena froze. Her handkerchief stopped halfway to her face. I understand, Julian continued, turning to face the gallery where Marcus sat, looking pale, that my wife and my business partner have spent the last 8 months liquidating my assets. I understand that Vane Holdings LLC is a shell company registered to Marcus Vane's brother, and I understand that the hallucination about the Zurich account was a specific test. Objection, Sterling shot up. The respondent is rambling. I'm not rambling, Arthur. Julian cut him off, cold as ice. I'm testifying. He nodded to Vance. Vance stood up and slapped a thick stack of documents onto the judge's bench. Your Honor, we are submitting into evidence the metadata from the plaintiff's phone. It shows that exactly 14 minutes after Mr. Thorne invented the lie about the Zurich account at his dinner table, Mrs. Thorne texted Mr. Vane the phrase, "Zurich contingency, check immediately." We are also submitting the forensic accounting logs of the unauthorized transfers. The judge picked up the papers. She looked at the text message log. She looked at the bank transfers. Then she looked at Elena. Mrs. Thorne, the judge asked, her voice dropping an octave, can you explain why you were investigating a hallucination 14 minutes after it occurred? Elena opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the floor. The air in the room seemed to adhere to them, heavy with the sudden crushing weight of truth. The architecture of a lie depends on the foundation, Julian said, his voice echoing in the silent room. And yours just collapsed. The proceedings that followed were a blur of legal violence. The petition was dismissed with prejudice. The judge ordered an immediate freeze on all of Elena's and Marcus's accounts pending a fraud investigation. When the gavel finally banged, it sounded like a gunshot. Elena didn't move. She sat in her chair, staring at the table, stripped of her narrative, stripped of her victimhood. She looked small. Julian didn't look back. He gathered his coat. He walked past Marcus, who wouldn't meet his eyes. He walked out of the double doors into the hallway. The courthouse was busy, filled with people fighting their own wars. Julian walked to the main exit. He pushed open the heavy doors and stepped out onto the steps of the Supreme Court. The New York air was cold and smelled of exhaust and rain. It was the most beautiful thing he had ever smelled. He reached into his pocket and felt the empty space where his wedding ring used to be. He had left it on the defendant's table. A taxi pulled up to the curb. Julian raised his hand, strong, steady, decisive. Where to? The driver asked. Julian looked back at the courthouse one last time, then turned his gaze to the skyline he had helped build. He saw the steel, the glass, the concrete. Structures that stood tall because they were honest about their gravity. The office, Julian said. I have work to do. The car pulled away, merging into the river of traffic, leaving the ruins of his marriage behind him in the rearview mirror, shrinking until they were gone.